So, good afternoon and welcome to our micro chat, how community colleges integrate certifications into career pathways. And just a few reminders before we begin. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared publicly after this session. We ask that you please place your audio on mute unless you are speaking. And add your questions and comments to the chat box or use the raise your hand function during the Q&A to be recognized to speak. For the agenda today, you will notice it on the slide, but we are going to start with an overview of the Certification and Degree Pathways project, presentations followed by discussion about some of the certification plus degree pathways that were developed and implemented by the 3 community colleges who are participating with us today. A discussion of some of the resources that resulted from this project and a discussion about next steps. Next slide, please. As an overall, the purpose of this project was to work with the 4 community colleges to create 8 new certification plus degree pathways. Our target population was low-income, first-generation, and adult leaders. And we focused on 2 areas in particular, health science and information technology, although this concept can easily be adapted to other sectors. And you'll see the partners, the 4 community colleges, plus the Higher Learning Commission and the League for Innovation in the Community College. Next slide. This is the 8 pathways that the partners developed, and the college representatives on today's call will discuss the pathways and some of the lessons learned throughout this project, which was funded by the generous support of the ECMC Foundation. Next, in addition, we'll be discussing some of the resources that were developed, specifically Rufus Glasper, President and CEO of the League for Innovation in the Community College book that was created to guide community colleges to develop certification and degree pathways. And Karen Solomon, Vice President and Transformation Officer of the Higher Learning Commission, will share information about how these pathways can support institutional accreditation processes. We're going to begin by hearing from 3 of the community college partners. First up is Jennifer Dale, Associate Vice President of Online and the Centennial Campus in the Division of Academic Success at the Community College of Aurora in Colorado. So Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate being here and excited to share out about the project we were able to do in partnership with our folks here on the call. And I want to be mindful of time, and I get really excited about this work. So I'm going to dive in and look forward to any questions folks have about this. But I'm going to highlight the behavioral health pathway. This pathway, I think, really captured kind of the intent of the grant and was the most dynamic as far as moving and shaking and aligning with industry. So when this grant came along, it was perfect timing as we had also started this work for behavioral health in Colorado. There was a Senate bill that was passed that required that the Colorado Community College system, which CCA is a part of, partner with our behavioral health administration to create new educational pathways from high school into higher ed to ensure that we could address the workforce shortages in behavioral health and get our community members services provided, right, in a more timely manner. This was just after COVID, and people were seeing 6 months of a wait time, et cetera. And we couldn't simply say, give us 6 to 8 years and we'll have a bunch of master's level clinicians trained up for you. And so our community college system, education design lab, partnered up with our behavioral health administration and a variety of other folks, kind of you can see down further on the slide, to really start brainstorming how do we look at behavioral health a little differently and build in a stackable micro-credential pathway where they could get industry credentials and or we could create some, which is a really cool aspect to what ended up happening in our program, to ensure that we could get folks in entry-level positions, mid-level positions, and then still have that merge ramp or pathway to advanced positions should they want to pursue them. So the goals and processes of our project were iterative and collaborative. We had a ton of partners. I'll talk about the importance of our ecosystem here in a minute. But really the goal from that Senate bill and some funding that came along with it that I think was critical to ensure that this project could get off the ground, and then our ability to take the C+D framework and look at how do we make sure we embed an industry credential wherever we can so that students really have the value of both the industry credentials and the degree pathway they're in and get to work more quickly. And so the funding from the Senate bill also helped kind of from a state level really structure that capacity. But it specifically said to increase and diversify the behavioral health care workforce. Historically, it's a long and expensive pathway, and there are many populations that have not had access to that pathway. So while the traditional pathway is critical, we need master's level and beyond trained professionals. There were other opportunities to get creative. So we wanted to reduce the barriers to the field, and we created a curriculum design team that had metro and rural colleges, faculty and administrators that came together and started thinking about what could be different, right? And that ecosystem was really, really critical to figure out who needs to be at the table. And it's not just industry, they're critical for sure. Our SMEs come from industry and our higher ed area, but we also need to talk to employees. We need to talk to learners, right? Make sure that the pathways we're creating are viable for them and have a good return on investment. We need to make sure we're collaborating with any state agency or accrediting body who's involved. And then we really need to make sure we're starting from the front end with our K-12 partners involved so that we're not trying to retroactively fit things. I wanted to highlight kind of 3 changes because of this ecosystem and this iterative process and the C+D framework that we were able to do. One of the industry credentials is a peer support specialist, a certified peer support specialist. And they take a specific exam and they can begin work in the behavioral health field if they have lived experience, have gone through this industry training, and then complete successfully the exam. Well, we thought, let's create a micro credential, right, to support folks in achieving that. And luckily, part of our ecosystem was employees. So we went and talked to peer support specialists, and they said, no, thank you. Because they saw it actually as adding a barrier of folks having to go to college to get that certificate to be able to enter into the field. And so instead of saying, oh, okay, we won't do that, we were able to pivot and say, okay, there's a lot of peers out there that may want to continue their own educational training and industry credentialing so that they can advance in different ways in the field. What if we create a class that's identical or comparable, with the industry training so that you can come in and get prior learning credit or CPL, credit for prior learning, because you've done the training, you've been working as a peer, now that can come into the program. So that was one example of change. There was another, we were going to do an industry credential, and then there was an age barrier. And our K-12 partners said, well, then our concurrent enrollment students can't participate. And in Colorado at CCA especially, we have over half of our student population in concurrent enrollment. And so that could not be a barrier. So we had to move away from that industry credential and look for others that made sense to ensure they were within that pathway. And finally, an example that we did when we built this curriculum, it was iterative with our partners. We would go to industry and all these different groups, learners have focus groups, get the information, come back, draft, and then go back and kind of vet the material. And during one of those conversations, an industry partner said, I don't need this class in your curriculum at that level. Here's what I need instead. Do you have? So that allowed us to make sure our curriculum aligned to our workforce partners, to assess where we needed to build capacity or add in industry certifications. And then in one instance, we actually created a new one for the state of Colorado, which is really cool. I'll talk about that in the next slide. So what we ultimately were able to do is build a pathway that has folks enter quickly within one semester and start working on not only working in their field, but that allows them to build networking and social capital that allows them to advance that social and economic mobility even faster, right? If they can get started right away and work in their field. And that's what students were most excited about. They didn't have to go work somewhere else while they were in school. They could get started very quickly and then continue to stack. So what you see on this slide is our stackable pathway. Starting with our certificates at CCA, we wanted to make sure that we had a fully credit-bearing program. And so that was interesting, right? With the C+D framework is here's our pathway, and how do we get some of these non-credit certs kind of in here, or industry certs in here? And so we have, I won't go into each one, but what I want to highlight is anything with the asterisk has an industry credential embedded as part of it. And those are Medicaid reimbursable, which is critical to the behavioral health care industry in Colorado, that those were able to be billed when part of a care team. And so the qualified behavioral health assistant is the one we were actually able to create in partnership with the Behavioral Health Administration. The entry level positions in the field were not really normed, if you will. And so folks had, sometimes they'd be hiring someone with no experience or a little bit of experience, and then they would try and train them and get them upskilled for that position. But we were hearing from our industry partners that retention and advancement was not where they wanted it. So in partnership with all of those ecosystem members, we created a 10 credit hour certificate and a non-credit boot camp for existing entry-level workers to, show that they had those competencies as well, and make them come and do an extra 10 credit hours if they were already working in the field. So that was the one we created, and then we built on that. So our QBHA2 adds experiential learning very early on, as opposed to waiting until your master's degree. The others that you see here, addiction recovery assistant, align to the certified addiction technician in Colorado. And so that's what we kind of just work through doing. You'll see that peer support specialist, that's a part of our associate degree, as well as an RBT, which is another industry certification, so that students can kind of pick their pathway depending on their own lived experience or not, or their interest areas. And then our bachelor's degree that all of these stack into, it's the first bachelor's of applied science for CCA, which is really exciting. But that BAS, we made sure would meet the state level requirements for the certified addiction specialist as well. And so again, industry credential, state regulatory recognition, Medicaid reimbursable. So really trying to make sure that every student is entering into a pathway that is intentional and stackable. They don't lose credits, and that they get into kind of that job as quickly as possible, and then they can advance, right? So yeah, I would highlight how the advisory board is critical, is one of those ecosystem members. And so that constant back and forth and iterative process with your industry partners, and then really ensuring that students have that direct employment access. And part of that is usually industry credential, right, that they need. So our last slide here, I am being mindful, I have 1 more minute, it looks like, is just a visual to capture this program for folks to demonstrate kind of what and how we did to ensure stackability. So students can enter into any of those bottom left corner micro-credentials or certificates. Depending on the college, they may have implemented in a different way. At CCA, those are also credit-bearing certificates. All of those classes stack into one of our Associate of Applied Science degrees. There are 2 pathways. Again, everything aligns with state requirements and our Behavioral Health Administration. And then those stack into that Bachelor of Applied Science, again, ensuring that alignment. They can pick those between those 2 concentrations. And then the boot camp, you can see where it kind of aligns there to our QBHA, so that our current workers that are already in the field can take a fully asynchronous boot camp and demonstrate competencies, upskill if they don't pass on a specific competency. And that was built in direct partnership with industry. Our SME that developed the curriculum has gone up through kind of these rankings in their own job pursuits, and is the one who created the curriculum to align with those QBHA courses. So I'll stop there. I see questions. I think, are we holding those for the end? I saw the
Yes,
chat.
we're gonna ask, yeah, we're gonna answer the questions after the 3 of you each give your presentation.
Great. Okay. Thank you so
Jen,
much.
thank you so much. And now we're going to move on to Gary Vogt, the Outreach Coordinator for Business and Information Technology at Kirkwood Community College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Gary.
Great, thanks, Karen. A little bit different from Kirkwood's a little bit different from Aurora, that we focused on the IT side of things, the information technology side of things, technology. And one thing we've had really been effective with in our region is in our associate degree programs. They know what rigor it is. They know what type of skill sets we get. They know what type of student they're getting, that they can pretty much just kind of add water and put them into the workforce. But if you're outside of the Kirkwood region or outside of just the Midwest, you may not quite realize all what an associate's degree in certain pathways have. So we kind of wanted to add some certifications that were going to be industry recognized, internationally recognized, nationally recognized, so that students could take a little bit more with them. One of the times I had an IT sector board, they taught me how to speak non-technical or technical to non-technical folks. And I'm a non-technical folk. And they often told me that in IT, they looked at it as codes versus cables. And that was probably 10 years ago, but we still have cables on the side that we're looking here, even though we are doing a lot more wirelessly and everything as before. And both of the certification options we're looking at are on the cable side. One of them was network and systems administration. And these are folks that are pretty heavy for these are pretty heavy on the hardware networks, get them up operational, make sure you get things connected as quickly as possible and as much as possible. And then we had the customer support specialist side, which focused a little bit more on the customer service. Commonly a tier 1, tier 2 help desk person. If you call somebody up on with a problem with your internet, your connections, that's probably somebody that's a computer support specialist. And in those programs, we hadn't really recognized industry credentials before. And we've always had the debate, and you'll kind of hear a theme in my 10 minutes here is we want to teach the skill set, not to the exam. And that's just something that we kind of had a new epiphany between ourselves, the industry, and the faculty who went through it. So the certifications we focused on were VMware Certified Technical Associate, CompTIA A+, CCNA, and Amazon Web Services. And we can go to the next slide then. So one of the things I wanted to kind of share on the process is just some of the things that were challenging to us that we kind of learned along the way. And one of them was, how are we going to choose what type of certifications we want? There's a lot of alphabet soup out there in anything that you look at, but when you're looking in IT particularly, CCNA, A+, just a variety of things there. So we worked really heavily, as Jen did, with our advisory councils, industry members, to try and understand what we have, what's priorities in the area, how can we have something that serves the majority of people, even though people have their own individual talent, individual areas of expertise that they're looking at. Another thing that we always needed to stay up with, and through our 3 years, we had to make a slight adjustment along the way, but the pace of technology. The change on that. One of our advisory council members spoke to a capstone class we had with our network and systems administration students, and he said, I'm sorry to break it to you, but every year you're going to lose 33% of your knowledge. That's just what at least the pace of technology is going. So if you're thinking you're going to go through your 3 years here and not go to any more education or want to try and upgrade your skills, he said, you're going to seriously limit yourself for future employability. So that's something we always had to continue to work with our industry members at. Some of the other smaller logistical side of things is we had a little difficulty tracking student outcomes with a third-party certification that wasn't attached with anything that we could easily get outcomes on that one. And then one of the last points that we brought up is our certification exam logistics. Originally, we didn't have Pearson VUE on campus. We had to go 60, 90 miles away to get these exams done. It wasn't convenient for our students. Our students didn't understand what the testing environment was. So that's just one of those items that we learned along the way, that those small things we take for granted can make a big difference. Next slide. And then as we mentioned, industry members played a very important part on what we were looking to do. Because our main goal on it is we want the certifications that's going to get our individuals employed. And I think Karen and Rufus and we all talked a little bit in the past that while we have associate degrees and we have plans of studies and such, not often it's hard for us to articulate to employers or to industry partners what this actually skill set means. And by getting these industry recognized credentials, it's easier for them because we're talking their language on that. We're talking technical to the technical folks now. So that's one of the things that help. But we've had biannual feedback through advisory councils. We haven't been afraid to put out employer surveys. Somebody in my database class said, hey, this technology, Gary, do you mind sending out a quick Google form to your employers and see how many use it, how do they use it, and where we go from there? So then we look at that. Our faculty have been really good in supporting our students in internship and job placements and continuing to follow up with the folks that are out there. How is our skill set relating? How did Gary do on his job? Is this a skill set that he's seamlessly transitioning in? We've used local job postings, skills assessment. And as I mentioned, our faculty is regularly involved in the community in kind of a secret way that I don't know if we figured it out or just kind of maybe is a mad science of it all, is a vast majority of our adjunct faculty come from industry. So if we continue to have adjunct faculty that are involved in industry, working with industry on an everyday basis, they can kind of bring that experience right to the classroom in a very easy way. Next slide. One of the things we wanted to determine, how is it going to be, what is industry going to recognize as our markers of success? And you'll see as one of them, the ability to pass the certification exams, an easy way to do that. But it's not always the most valuable way for that we can do that. So one of them was the development of the skill set. Can students have the ability to research and ask questions, not just answer A, B, C, or D on a test? Do they understand the why behind the technology? Additionally, do they have the communication skills? They have the ability to comprehend, ask questions, build conversation back and forth. And that was one of the part of our success that we marked on that as ready as well. Proficient with the product, work-ready students, desired ability to continue at the professional development. That was another item there. And then another part was retaining the knowledge from the certification exam and the educational process. Next slide. So kind of our overreaching thoughts on how the credential pathways worked. As I mentioned, we had this, I've been in this area for quite a while, as you could see from my hairline. But, the debate always existed. I don't want to teach to the test. I'm not here to pass these folks are selling their tests enough, and I'm not here to promote their test form and such. But as we found out, we got industry in the room with educators, and it's not an either or thing. We can make them work together. And part of the way we learned along the process, it was nice that when our educators got test prep into their course, they started putting test prep into their course, and they started realizing, hey, we can work this right into our labs. We can work this into our curriculum. It actually supports the learning that we have when we do that. So we've kind of learned, how can we do both? I think we've had a few folks maybe ask a question about how certification costs are covered. In this case, we were very fortunate with the grant portion that at this time we had grant funding to help cover the costs on the certification. That's something we'll need to maybe consider in the future. How are we going to handle the items? I do think we've built a lot of goodwill with our industry. That's something that we can maybe look at in the future. Another cost benefit discussion that we've had with employers is if we tell them, okay, they can take a network associate's degree program that's 16 weeks over 16 weeks, 4 days a week. They get a little scared off, but if we say, hey, we can offer this program that's going to get you an A+ certification on Friday afternoon for 8 weeks in a row, something that they can digest a little bit more. And then kind of the last thing we found out about it is it's helpful when we go with certifications, we can meet students where they're at. A lot of times somebody's not ready for a full 2 years and looking at a large curriculum such as that. If we get them small bite-sized pieces, they start getting the confidence, they start gaining positive experiences along the way. And our kids in social media are certainly there. They always get you a little star, a little widget along the way. So as they went along with all these certifications, they built their confidence, and that encouraged additional certifications, additional confidence in moving forward. So that's what I have for now, and I'll stick around for questions. And
thank you, Gary. Greatly appreciated. We're now going to move on to hear from Kevin Vaccaro, the Department Chair of Computer and Integrated Technologies at Palos Hills, Illinois. So Kevin, go ahead.
Hello, I prefer not to show you myself on camera. I'm not a location that I want to show you, but that's okay. I can talk. So basically what happened is my partner and I, we knew that our advisory committee recommended that we add cloud computing into our curriculum. We had not had it in there. We have professionals that work in with us as adjuncts, and they did recommend we needed to add some kind of cloud provider, some kind of because the students were leaving the program and were not able to talk, they talk basically or understand it. So what happened was we sat down at a coffee shop, he and I, we reworked our curriculums and literally came up after looking at the cloud vendors with a program that we could integrate in our existing AAS and also have a separate certification track for those who just wanted a certificate. And that's where Microsoft Azure came into play. One of the challenges we had originally was Microsoft was just entering into space again. They hadn't been doing certs for a long time with education. They've been doing it with outside vendors. So it took us about a year to work with them to get free labs and a lot of other stuff. Then it took us another year with the ICCB to actually get these courses implemented because they had to go through curriculum review and so forth and so on. So now we do have it implemented. We are just starting to see students take the courses. We have not had students in the courses yet because they weren't widely advertised until we had worked out all the kinks. We finally successfully ran 2 courses and we're starting to see more students now being required to take more of the cloud. And the project really was, we were really looking to, excuse me, redesign our curriculum, make sure the students had the skill set that when they left our program, they could actually go and start an industry. So that was the impetus behind all this. It took us longer than most because of all the things that we ran into, various inhibitors. But then, after we got past those, we finally were able to get the courses up, we were able to start spreading the word, student to students, and, we finally are now starting to run the courses. We've always traditionally told students to take the CERT exams. Once you got a funding problem with CERT exams, students generally won't take them unless there's zero cost or stuff for that. So we haven't overcome that barrier. We do have a Pearson testing center on campus where they could come and just take the exam without having to go anywhere. But they still, cost prohibitive was always the issue. And still to this day, we run into that kind of issue. But really what we wanted to get is to basically start looking more and more at the skills that the employers were asking and how do we integrate them in our existing degrees, then offer a separate certification track or cert that if it's somebody, an industry partner wanted to take, I don't want to take a full degree, I just want a cert, they could come in and they go through our little cert process so that they can also get a credential. But it's been a long road, going through all the roadblocks we had to run into. First, just trying to get the Microsoft in place, and second to get past the required curriculum review. But now I think we're in a good place, and that's about all I have to say about the program, to tell you the truth. So.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I want to open it up for Q&A. We talked a little bit, I know there were several questions about, how our certification, exams covered. I was going to ask Jen, have you thought about how the certification exam costs will be covered in the pathway that you developed in behavioral health?
Yes, so for now, there are a few different costs associated. One of the things we have not found a solution. I'll start there. So we're still not game planning. We're brainstorming. There we go. Still trying to figure out how to do that. Some of the ways that we've had suggested are you might be able to buy vouchers for certain tests, but then what source of funding do you use to purchase those? Can they be student fees? So it's still wrapped into kind of their tuition package. So we are still researching that. For now, we have not included those because we're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for students and is the most affordable kind of option. But that is one of the questions. One thing we did do for the CAT and CAS, our addiction recovery specialist pathway and degree, those, if you take kind of the courses without working with the Behavioral Health Administration directly to create an MOU and say you can take these classes, right, at these community colleges and they count. If you don't get that MOU as an individual college, then students will have to pay to get them kind of uploaded and evaluated by our regulatory body. And so we made sure we did the MOU so that we could absolutely reduce that cost. It's pretty it's low cost. It's, I think, $5 per course that they have to evaluate, but those add up, and we just did not want that as a barrier. So some of the other CERT exams, we have not solved that challenge yet. We're working on it. And then some of them, we did identify ways to make sure that students didn't have to incur costs in general.
Great, thank you. And I know there's a question from Nancy Kaplan about, did you have to show potential salaries based on certificates through these pathways, or what type of labor market information did you use? How did you use it? How are you talking about career progression with your students?
Yeah, great question, and absolutely. So for CCA, we have to do an ROI evaluation in any new program we take to our cabinet. And so that includes salaries, estimated growth, et cetera. And in behavioral health, especially, that can be hard because behavioral health is historically underpaid, right? As are many critical fields, unfortunately. So what we made sure we did was evaluate what they're going to earn entry level, mid-level, and then potential for that advanced. Because we do have kind of this trajectory where they can go on and get their master's, but don't have to. And what we found was that entry level is comparable to the service industry, which is where a lot of folks are working while they're going to school, or the labor industry. And so the entry level pay is not where we want our students to stay. We want them to be able in this field. We want them to be able to use that to get into the field, but then continue advancing because it is an entry level wage. So we did have to show that and then show how our stackable pathway really reduces barriers for students to get to those higher level salaries.
Great. What about Gary and Kevin? What about your use of labor market information?
I think we addressed that a little bit on those advisory board meetings when we did that, and when our grant writer put up quite a bit of that in the grant when we wrote the grant for us there. I guess we continue to follow it. I don't know that we have the exact labor market information handy that I can pull up there. It was interesting. I was just in a committee meeting I was in a meeting about cybersecurity with somebody the other day, and they said that they're anticipating 2 million openings in the next 2 to 3 years, which is incredible to me. But so we could probably do a little bit better on those items there. We just more or less met with industry, said, are these positions available? What certifications would help get people more employable into these positions and help them get entry level positions there?
Kevin, any thoughts to add?
Not really. We just really work with our partners who usually we send our students to, so they kind of gave us the impetus to where to go with the curriculum, things to that effect.
And I know Barbara Kaufman had a question about kind of your work with Microsoft. Do you think Microsoft would be interested and is open to engaging with other community colleges around utilizing Microsoft Azure?
Sure, you could just sign up. They have a page called Microsoft for Educators. You can work directly. The guy, I don't remember who was the head of it, but you can work directly with Microsoft, and sure, they would gladly want to engage. And rather than, I've told other educators, if you sign up, you can then work with Microsoft directly on Azure. They give you more than just Azure. There's a wide range of courses they will offer for free. Curriculum and labs, well, limited labs, labs to the education community.
Great. And Jen, there's another question for you. Did the certification exams have to pivot as a result of the stackable pathways? In other words, are there certification exams at the end of each stackable pathway?
So it depends. We tried to make sure we could plug them in wherever we could. So some of the industry certifications are actually attached to individual classes. So as part of their degree path, right? If they take the peer support specialist class, I think it's BEH 10, I can't remember the number, but once they take that course, they don't have to wait until they're done with a specific certificate or degree. They can actually go ahead and take the ICNRC exam and then move forward with registering as a peer support specialist, following the Colorado requirements through COPA, which is the organization that oversees it. So for that one, it's actually tied to a class that's an elective. They get to choose between right now the peer support specialist or the RBT. Both of those are industry certifications. We do hope to expand those electives and create curriculum in higher ed that aligns to those industry trainings and certificates. Then some of the certificates are part of the certificate as a whole, the industry like credentials. So the QBHA, they would either have to complete the 10 credit hours, and by completing those and earning their qualified behavioral health assistant certificate, that is their credential. There's no kind of cumulative exam at the end of that. Again, that was actually because the BHA said we don't want to create barriers. So if they've done all the coursework, passed the classes, demonstrated competency, we don't want to add another test for that purpose. The boot camp is a series of competencies that align with the QBHA certificate, and those they take a test to demonstrate their competency for each kind of CLO that's involved. And then upon completing that boot camp, they also can then become a QBHA.
Great. So I have a question for all of you as well. So some students that you work with might not have a lot of experience taking standardized exams. And how did you implement, or what strategies have you implemented to help students prepare for success on these standardized exams?
I'll kind of start that one because I kind of brought it up in a meeting at one time there. It was one of the most eye-opening aha moments that we had in the grant process, in that the first year when we started going through these certifications, as I mentioned, we had to take students to about an hour to have 90 minutes up, and I took a van of students up, and they're all anxious heading up to the testing. And I was just asking them questions about it, since I wasn't technically savvy. They were real quiet on the way up because they're nervous and they're prepped and everything. But when we got done with it, I asked them how did the process go and how they feel that it went. And the biggest thing I found out, it was just the environment that got them anxious. There was part of it that they said, I wish I would have known it was how the timing of the exam worked. That is, is it better for me to take a minute on this question to get it right? Or is it better if I need to skip it because it's going to take me extra time to get more of the other 200 questions right at the time? And they also wondered about, okay, it seemed like I was going into almost isolation by doing the testing process. So what we learned from that process is, one thing we did is we then said any faculty that hadn't been through the testing, let's put them through that testing so they kind of know what the process looks like. And then two, we got exam prep from the vendors on that. And two, we set up simulation environments for the testing, so students did have so much test anxiety on that one. It made it a lot more effective, and it actually made it more of an experience for the whole group as opposed to each individual kind of competing to see what they get on the test. So that was one of the big lessons that we learned in the process is don't take it for granted that everybody knows how to do these standardized testings and is comfortable with it, and it's just a secondhand nature.
Thanks, Gary. Jen, Kevin, anything else to add?
That's the right free workshops. We offered them so that they could practice before they actually had. So free workshops and review sessions we do in our own time.
Great. And Holly Zanville had a question. Are any of you reporting industry certification completion data to any state databases? And maybe you could also expand upon that about your ability to gather that information from what sources you're gathering it from. Is it from, do you have to track down students? Do you have a relationship with the certification bodies that can provide that data directly to you?
Jen's probably got a little different experience on that than me dealing with the health side. IT, we are not. Our way that we are communicating is through email, we're pulling the information from the students at this time Karen and her crew, we've started having conversations with some of our third parties to see if we can make that a little easier on all involved. The one thing about bringing the state in onto it is, I think one thing we're looking to do now is some of these certifications can actually be backed up into high school even. So we've decided to, we're keeping track of this information. So maybe we can, when we're asking about future funding, maybe involve the state in it as well. And even go back to, I think somebody mentioned maybe Gen concurrent enrollment or other folks concurrent enrollment, maybe expanding or taking some of these items down into the concurrent enrollment high school age and move it forward.
Jen?
Yeah, what I'll add is that the tracking is part of our assessment. And so creating these metrics, and some of those are still being designed. How are we going to track XYZ? At the state level, we can track who's completed the boot camp or the QBHA, but we don't have access to know, let's say, for the students that take the peer support specialist class, we don't have access to the ICNRC database or tracking system. So some of those pieces of the puzzle for tracking, we're still putting together, I would say, but we also do have some of it available, right? Depending on which industry certificate we're talking about. So it depends on that one, but that's not where we're going to stop with that answer, because we want to be able to track and see to some other questions I saw in the chat. So for example, maintaining their certifications. Do they understand the requirements? And someone else asked a good question that was kind of related, like, are you preparing them to take those exams as part of the class? And the answer is yes. Again, not in a teaching to the test method, but in a how do we ensure we have best practices aligned for the curriculum, that they know how to navigate the system, whichever class they might be in, how to take the test, what their steps are. And then each teacher, of course, kind of equipping with resources to ensure that they're going to be successful on those. But we haven't launched those classes yet. So that'll be starting in spring. We'll start seeing those across the system, not just at CCA. And we'll then be able to really see the data on if we find that tracking mechanism, right, of how many take the exam, pass the exam, and enter the field. Like that is all part of our data collection plan.
We often make the assumption that these educators are taking these third-party exams or they know all the information in it. They may know the information on it. And educators maybe have never been asked to take this exam and or have never sat through that process. And that's where, as I mentioned, that was our aha moment that really kind of started when we had our educators go through the testing. Some of them were a little anxious that they didn't know if they wanted to sit through the testing as well. But here, we'll give you the test prep. You go through the test prep with the students, or you go through the test prep in advance and you take this test. Now you can kind of say, hey, we've been in that shoes. I came from the banking side that we called it banking from the other side of the desk. You got the customer's perspective on it. And that was something that was really effective when we looked at that process that, again, it's not rocket science. It was real simple to do, but we just never thought about that simple thing there. And additionally, when we got the testing site on, we got the testing center on site, that made a really large difference. Now students could walk down the hallway, they could kind of arrange it right around their class time. It made it a lot, like you said, the anxiety was a lot easier to manage in that case.
So we talked a little bit about certification bodies, right? They're the ones who are offering these certification exams. From your perspective, what would you like certification bodies to do, or how could they better facilitate and help you with your work to integrate certifications into your academic programs?
I still need to think about that a little bit. But one of the sides that really made an effective discussion for us at Kirkwood was when the industry partners mentioned how they use the certification. Sometimes I think maybe when we had the certification bodies, ours are more third party than state recognized and such. So sometimes they came with a little bit of a negative connotation or salesman type of say that you're just trying to sell this test to me. But when we got our industry involved and they mentioned, this is how I use the certification, or this is how I look at this certification, and somebody that has this on the resume, I immediately equate with this skill level. It made more sense to our faculty that we're not just teaching to get a piece of paper, we're teaching this is an additional way to verify the skill set that, as we mentioned in some of our side conversations, we as educators aren't always, we don't always articulate that very well when we're trying to explain what skill set they got, or articulate it in a way that industry listens, that maybe some of these third-party certifications do.
Jen, Kevin, anything else? Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I was like, I want to let Kevin go too. I don't want to take up all the space here. I was just going to say the collaboration and conversation is critical, right? They should be part of the ecosystem as far as a valued partner, that you understand what the requirements are, the value is, and then how to navigate the system with them. And so I know for both of the two I've highlighted specifically, there's just been a lot of conversation. And for one of those, we had to actually submit our entire curriculum to that body to say, can we be approved to offer this as an approved industry training for you, even though it's a class, right? So we're trying to cross those, I think, artificial barriers between industry and higher ed. They exist for a reason. I'm not saying that, but they don't need to be there in many cases. And how do we break those down? So for them to just be willing and open to have that conversation, which we've had that. Even the industry certification we were not able to include in our program due to age restrictions, there was a conversation about that and the why, so that we understood it. And so I think that those bodies just really continuing to be open to the conversation and collaboration to find where we can remove barriers, embed them where it makes sense, communicate the value and or requirement to use them, et cetera, is critical. And then the other thing I'll add to the question a bit earlier about, if has the teacher taken the test kind of question. So in higher ed, we often think of, even with CTE, we often think of folks with these quals as high-level degrees or experience and all of this. And what we actually did was build it into our teaching qualifications. So even though I have a master's in counseling psychology, I am not qualified to teach that peer support specialist class because I am not a peer. I have never been a peer, and I'm not going to teach. So we actually made that a qualification. We asked the employees and the employers who should be teaching these trainings, and our state body also, requires that, but making sure we honor those requirements in industry and the certification boards in higher ed wherever possible, I think, is another piece.
And then one final question in this section is, if you could give a community college one piece of advice about implementing certification plus degree pathways, what would it be? Gary, we'll start with you because I see you first on my screen.
I'd say go for it. Put the items out there, talk with your industry partners and ask them how this matters to them. And I'll go back to that point again, that we talk to our students a lot. I talk to a lot of students that don't really know how to put their resume together, and they don't have the ability to, or they haven't been coached on how to represent their skill set. So I would say, give it a chance, go for it. Don't look at it as competing with your curriculum. Look at it as a way to support your curriculum and continue. Like I mentioned, a lot of times our faculty found out that this supports the lab work that they're doing and can easily be added to that as opposed to parallel to it. So don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to ask industry to get involved with it either, for their point of view as well. Ultimately, we do a lot of career and technical ed programs on this side here. So ultimately, we're building the bench for their future. So they're really open to providing support on that. So, yep, thanks for allowing me to participate.
Jen?
Everything Gary said, and I think find a champion who's flexible. So I think higher ed typically in degree pathways, things take a long time. Curriculum development and implementation and change takes a long time. And so I think finding a champion who's innovative and creative and willing to think differently, as opposed to, well, that's not how we've done it, right? And I don't see like that just kind of automatic, why would we add that in? They do that after. So you need folks on the team, if you're going to investigate it, that are those innovative thinkers that say, why not? How could this benefit? Sometimes you'll figure out, no, that one doesn't apply, but often you'll find some that do. So I really think that ecosystem and the people you pick to champion the work need to have that really innovative spirit.
And Kevin, I'll give you the last word.
Nothing more to add. Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Kevin, Gary, and Jen, for your great insights. We're going to switch gears now and talk about some of the resources that were developed to help support the development and implementation of certification plus degree pathways at community colleges. And I'd like to introduce Rufus Glasper, President and CEO of the League for Innovation in the Community College, who will discuss the playbook that they developed for community colleges. So, Rufus?
Thank you very much, Karen. So what you see in front of you is, excuse me, is a PowerPoint to a playbook that we've developed after working with the colleges that were involved in the project. And each of the playbook includes these 5 different sections. So I'll have an opportunity over the next 8 minutes to go through these very briefly and give you kind of a sense of what the journey was. Next slide. As we were speaking to the stakeholders within the C+D pathway development, it featured each of these 5 different major categories. And primarily as we started focusing on the areas, we started to begin with students. We were asking the colleges to kind of document their process for recruitment and engagement. Talk to us about how they engage faculty in terms of their roles and their engagement of the idea. Connecting certificates plus degrees is non-traditional. Some would say it's evolutionary as well. And when you talk about college leadership, we also were forming communities of practice with each of the college presidents and talking to the college leadership so that we could determine what were their thoughts relative to the particular project. And the next one is industries. As we were talking to the industries, how are you getting their ideas in terms of, have they already framed a certificate in mind? And many have. But as you're talking to these industries, the colleges are also sharing with us ideas that they garnered from them in terms of developing other certificates in other areas and what worked, what didn't work. How do you bring in advisory boards? How do you look at new pathways? And how do you look at the acceptance, not only with industry, but then acceptance from the certification bodies? And just like we have HOC represented on this discussion today and the other accrediting bodies across, there are also these certification bodies. Is this certificate going to be accepted across industries as well as across state lines and universally across the U.S.? The next slide, please. In terms of implementation steps, we were looking at the administrative setups. We were looking at whether or not this was set up in their system in terms of even resource allocation. They probably were not initially considered in their strategic plan. How will they be accepted in the strategic plan and considered in their strategic plan as new programming moving forward? In terms of your administrative setup, in terms of policies, advisement strategies, assessment strategies, testing, and Gary talked about that in terms of location, makes a difference. And also, how does it look in terms of each of these areas, in terms of faculty across different departments and emerging certificate programs plus degrees? Curriculum integration. How does this ensure certificates and skills are embedded within the course? Does this comply with the current course content procedure, or is it a deviation, and how will it be accepted? Technology and infrastructure. How does this align? Will it align with your current LMS system? How will we look at a dashboard for a student to kind of monitor their process? Are you going to be applying any types of technology that involve apps for the students so that they can maintain their own kind of progress as they move through these steps? Another major point is faculty development. Collaboration environment between current faculty and industry. In so many of these particular areas of focus now, as we talk about certificates, the faculty members will change. Conversations I know that are being happened right now across the country relative to quality assurance talk about faculty members that are coming from industry that are there because of their experience, not necessarily how they are tying to current assessment of these qualifications, but how they can fit into the current requirements within the established structure. Student recruitment and support. In many of the colleges, there's the traditional students that are looking at pathways, but there are also students who have possibly not attended our colleges pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, and now this is a good opportunity to bring them in on a certificate plus degree initiative that will allow them to think about taking a certificate, having that ladder into their particular program, and stay for a 2-year degree and or transfer to a 4-year degree. And in terms of partnerships, I believe that certification plus degree programs foster alignment with partnerships with business and industries, not only in terms of initial programming, but I also see them in terms of what is happening in their relationship in terms of business advisories, in terms of also partnerships with community colleges that may be different. And now we're trying to document what these conversations are from the colleges as we move through the process with these 4 colleges. And the last one on this page in terms of implementation, monitoring and evaluation, the whole notion of assessment, the whole notion of data collection, the whole notion of who is collecting the data and when and where. Is the employer who will eventually benefiting from this certificate? Can we get them engaged? So what are the experiences of the colleges in terms of employer engagement as well as institutional research in terms of also pass rate, maintaining pass rate? We are working through the League for Innovation. We're working with some companies which are now talking about what's the efficacy of certification plus degree kind of discussions, and does it allow our students to have a living wage and then be able to maintain that living wage. Next slide, please. In this particular one, and I talked about curriculum alignment and advisory board, faculty engagement and incentives, and professional development. Our traditional incentives and professional development, we'll get an opportunity to compare what our faculty members are stating in this handbook to what our traditional policies are, and can we look at adapting and adopting future policies to increase incentives in terms of faculty members being taught these certificates or being involved in their understanding of what the certificate is, or even testing for those certificates so they can become a more professional, so that they can achieve a more professional engagement in terms of how they teach and how the students accept them teaching this level of engagement. Student test anxieties, it's already been discussed in terms of practicing exams and workshops. And if we're able to capture these, this is a opportunity of information based upon this 3-year project. Each college has an opportunity through this playbook to update it and adapt it as they see fit. And then again, we bring in the accreditation, the early engagement with HLC to kind of talk to them about the process. And I personally believe that their adoption and establishment of the credential lab will help their understanding and help us kind of navigate through the process. Outcomes and impact. Students are able to move faster into these industry jobs, and we talk about moving faster, quicker, and more innovatively, and with a stronger understanding of where the career ladders are. And this is documented in this particular playbook relative to the experiences, again, of the 4 colleges. And it talks about how this entry has progressed with each of the individual students. There's some videos that you can have an opportunity to look at. And as we think about the colleges and employer partnerships, I personally believe, and I think it'll be demonstrated through the partnerships, that there will be improved enrollment, not only in short-term programs, but in laddering programs, in programs that will move from non-credit programs to credit programs, and then improve enrollment in terms of fast-track programming and micro-credentials and micro-pathways, and help us embellish the whole notion of certification plus degrees. Under employers, the skilled workforce can be documented. It can be documented in the skills training. It can be documented in the reduced training costs that would occur at the employer's level, and it can be reinforced. And it's also an opportunity that the college has to develop a relationship with the business industry. And I also believe in earlier points that we were presenting in terms of relationships and funding opportunities and partnerships. I believe it will bring stronger relationships in terms of the skilled workforce as they move forward. So I would encourage each of you to get a copy of the playbook. I would encourage you to think about what it means for education to move at the speed of business, to move faster and quicker and more innovatively, and to also look at the exchange and the engagement of credit for prior learning, but then also that new employee relationship that would occur as we increase the number of these certification plus degree programs, but then also what is the faculty going to look like in the present, and how will they scale, and how will they look in the future? And I would proffer to you that they will look different, and that we will have a different workforce that will be better prepared and more engaged and more familiar with the workplace. So with that, I will entertain any questions you might have. If not, we can move on and talk about accreditation.
Thank you, Rufus. We'll take questions after Karen talks again, but I'd like to introduce Karen Solomon, Vice President and Transformation Officer of the Higher Learning Commission, who will discuss how these pathways can support institutional accreditation.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the introduction. I'm thrilled to be here today as we've wound up this 3-year project and really want to focus now a bit on continuous improvement, which is the real hallmark of accreditation, and thinking about how have these institutions demonstrated continuous improvement, and how can they going forward as they go through their upcoming evaluations, things like that. So as we move on to the next slide, I want to remind folks that the credentialing framework, the landscape is large and massive. On this slide here, higher education is down in the bottom right corner, looking at all of those different types of entities that offered some different types of credentials, maybe something that our institutions will be engaged with going into the future, and thinking about how will they be engaged in those different ways? What are some other different types of credentials that could be actually woven into degree programs, not just certifications, which was the element of this grant, but thinking about that broader scope of how to weave in some of those different types of credentials going forward. So HLC over the last 2 years has launched its Credential Lab, and the Credential Lab has 2 different work streams in it. One is about an education and training provider endorsement, and that is for non-traditional entities that are not colleges and universities that can actually provide different type of training elements, maybe in partnership with some institutions, maybe delivering training opportunities directly to learners. Now, that's an endorsement category. But what we're also building right now and launching at the end of this month is an innovation center. This is really a place where we are designing in the initial phase for institutions to come together, learn from one another, share what their understandings are. It's something similar to what we're doing today with this webinar. Here are 4 institutions that have tested a concept, and here are the outcomes of that. We hope to have and intend to have more types of activities in the Innovation Center going forward. One of the things, though, that was created by this grant was actually a guidebook for institutions to think about if they've gone through something like embedding certifications into degree programs, how would they play that through in their accreditation relationship with HLC? So as we look at the next slide, we created a document called Promising Practices, where it actually takes information about what we learned through this project, but then the institutions that participated also identified for us what they would use if they were writing about this initiative in their an upcoming comprehensive evaluation as they're writing to the criteria for accreditation, all the different points of evidence that they may have gathered or built during this process. And so in the lessons learned section of this document, there were several elements that came through. They've already been mentioned a couple times today, but I wanted to highlight them once again. Partnerships. Partnerships were critical across the internal silos of institutions, but also out with external workforce relationships that they've been built or need to be building. And then also just having that institutional leadership ready to champion and move forward with different ways of delivering learning and recognizing learning at different points of time, especially in this case where they're embedding certifications, those recognitions of learning throughout the degree programs. Looking at how the curriculum's being built. Is it mapped to academic programs, or is it gone through a different type of process? And so where are the checks and balances for rigor and things like that within that curriculum building process? Maybe, and for some of our institutions, they were already offering some of this learning in standalone certificates and moved away from that and then began embedding it in the degrees so that the learning was more stackable and more portable as students maybe moved in and out of the degree program. Maybe they were learning and then working and then learning and then working, learning and earning throughout their time enrolled at the institution. We've heard quite a bit about testing. For some of our institutions, their testing centers had been closed during the pandemic, so they had to reopen those and get those up and operating again. Also finding different ways of providing testing opportunities that were helpful for the students and things like that. And then engagement with organizations. These are different types of organizations that our institutions may be involved with, whether it's your accrediting agencies, your licensure boards, state agencies, maybe even at the federal level, if some of your funding is coming from, say, the U.S. Department of Labor, things like that. So thinking about how those relationships are really going to play into some of these different types of programs that are offered by the institutions. And one of the other big elements was, how do you document the learning? So how would institutions actually post, or could they post the certifications earned onto the student transcript? Or how will students be able to demonstrate that they've passed this certification, and where is that information held going forward? One of the elements that one of the institutions discussed at length was the movement away from the concept of non-credit courses to actually calling them career credentials, thinking of them in a way that didn't bogged down to thinking that they didn't have value because they weren't credit courses, but they actually were career credentials. Moving that forward, I think, was an excellent way to sort of shift the thinking at the institution. And then lastly, think about student success. How are you going to demonstrate student success? In this situation, what was interesting is that we had some students actually job out. They left before completing the degree program because they had the certifications and they jobbed out. Well, then how do you record that? What are your student success metrics? And you may need to think about how you expand those metrics away from the traditional retention and completion metrics, but to think about some different ways of how students transfer out, they job out, they may stop out, and then some students may actually drop out. And so thinking about how you actually record those success initiatives with those students entering the workforce because they have that knowledge demonstrated demonstrated that they need. So hopefully this document will also be of assistance along with the playbook and the other resources that have been developed. All of our organizations have posted all of the resources on our website, so feel free to use them as you see fit. Karen, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Karen. So thanks so much, Rufus and Karen, for those comments. As we wrap up this webinar, I thought it would be interesting to have Karen and Rufus comment a little bit on where do you see this type of work going next. Obviously, HLC is moving forward with its credential lab, which is a really exciting innovation. But from your perspective on accreditation and Rufus's perspective from the community college, this project was meant as a pilot with 4 colleges. But what can be done moving forward to expand this work or to share the learnings from this work with other members of the community?
I will begin by saying that I think it's a great precursor to laying the foundation that it can happen, that it can work. That the 3 years were I will use the phrase that it was a challenge. It was a challenge because it was post-pandemic. It was a challenge because of trying to get the attention of the organization and the leadership in general, trying to get a sense that this was a movement that can be made at a time when we were still following the traditional paradigm, when we were still looking at the existing structure. It had only been tested in small cases. It had been tested in terms of fast-track training, micro-credentials, and micro-pathways, but not necessarily certification plus degrees, where you're actually changing the structure. So I think it has a strong potential to escalate and scale. It has a strong potential to changing the way we perceive the relationships with business and industry. And it is an invitation to engage business and industry to get more involved. And I think the more involved that they get in our colleges, then you have the ability to look at another potential funding source. A funding source that's directly aligned to the pipeline that they need. And I also believe that the voices that are being heard across the credential lab and across the certification plus degree tables are voices that traditionally were moving in different directions. Now they're moving in a similar direction, and they could serve as an empowerment tool to our students. And we just need to know that the train is going to move forward with or without us. So,
Karen?
And Rufus, I always remember the conversation we had several years ago when you were chancellor at the Maricopa Community College District, talking about how the industry wanted some different types of credentials, but they were expecting that those credentials would be built relatively quickly and then didn't really typically align with your curriculum timeline development process at the institution. And so I think there's some opportunities for institutions to realize the historic ways of doing things may need to be adapted, especially if you're going to be engaged with workforce on a more regular basis. I think one of the things that we've learned is that, and what we're piloting right now in some curriculum that we're posting in the Innovation Center with a group of institutions, is that we really need to be ready to talk about change leadership and change leadership across the entire institution and how that's going to drive thinking about utilizing different types of credentials, building stackable degrees, credentials that lead to degrees and things like that. Looking at also how your faculty understand what skills, knowledge, and abilities that learners will need, and how they build that into their curriculum, maybe gaining a better understanding of competency-based education and how that plays out and how you outline that within your curriculum. That's been a tough one for many faculty to get a grasp of and be able to really outline that in their curriculum for their different types of credentials that they're offering. And then also gaining an understanding of how to work with the workforce. and how to engage with them, how to understand how they operate, and also to hear what they need and be able to interpret that and work with that within the institution. That's what we're building some curriculum within the Innovation Center to assist our institutions, not just for certifications into degrees, but different types of credentials to really serve all those learner populations that they have.
And I think, Karen, you raised something really interesting, which is that move to skills-based hiring or a greater focus on competencies. And that, in some cases, is one of the benefits of the opportunity to integrate certifications into degree programs, is that certifications are based on competencies. I think, as Gary mentioned, those competency statements, speaking the language of the employer, make it much easier for the students to understand what they've learned and how to translate that learning into something that can help them get a career. And I would also say that those certification bodies, many of them have their exam or their test blueprints freely available online. So it's something that faculty members can easily access. Whether you integrate the certification or not, you can get the information about what industry believes is relevant, in that specific occupation and how that can be incorporated into the curriculum. Karen, I wanted to ask you, one of the issues that arose was it's hard to figure out which of these certifications to integrate into a degree, right? There are a lot, and if we expand that to micro-credentials and certificates, there are a lot of other credentials that are produced that are not produced by higher education. How will the Credential Lab, or what role will the Credential Lab have in helping faculty and colleges understand which one might be right for you?
Well, I think that goes back to some of the comments earlier this afternoon in talking about labor statistics and information that is needed to make those determinations. Some of those, some credentials, let's say in the technology field, may have high value, that there may be some other technology credentials that are available out there that may not be recognized by industry. So it's really having that strong connection to industry to really understand what they need and what they will accept going forward. What the challenge is also, we want and encourage our institutions to be innovative, but then as a gatekeeper for federal financial aid, we still have to operate on the accreditation side under federal regulations. And so then we really need to make sure that in this, in these discussions at institutions, that each institution's accreditation liaison officer is involved in the conversations so that they know when they need to turn to their accrediting agency and say, we may need approval for this because this, with this other partner, is a contractual arrangement based on federal and agency definitions. And so we may need to go through some type of approval process or things like that. So it's once again, just expanding that, those partnerships across those silos within the institution to really keep moving it forward as seamlessly as possible.
And this is a little bit kind of off topic, but not. But Rufus, I wanted to ask you, with the conversation around short-term Pell, are there opportunities what are the opportunities for colleges around short-term Pell that may also think about how you could integrate some of these other credentials to meet these new requirements and provide more opportunities to students?
From what I am finding with some of my due diligence, that many of our colleges would have a tough time right now qualifying for short-term Pell because of some of the requirements that they are asking relative to having to restructure the relationships, having to restructure the documentation that's necessary to move forward. I think it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity that unfortunately is being driven by a funding mechanism, but I think it's also an opportunity to restructure and have a closer engagement with industry because they cannot meet these qualifications without connecting with industry, and they cannot reach these qualifications without the capturing of data that cannot in many cases be captured and sustained by the colleges. It has to be in partnership with the companies that are hiring our students. And it'll help us prove the efficacy of the programming. It will help us prove the fact that it does lead to a thrivable wage, as many of our presidents are asking for, and that you can move from certificate to degrees and continue to stay at or above that livable wage. So there are pathways to get there, but they're non-traditional. And as I talked about in terms of quality assurance being one of the items, it's something that when I was on the board for HLC, we started talking about the evolution. And the quality assurance is a big one, because professional development in our community colleges cannot keep up with the changes in technology and the changing in the needs of what's happening in our industries without merging that workforce with our education workforce and with the current requirements for a master's degree in the area or a master's degree plus 18. Because some of these will start on the non-credit side of the house, and unless they are converted to credit and become laddering, there won't be much movement, and it'll stop there. So, and I think by doing that, the certification plus degrees will move faster, quicker, and more innovatively. And what Karen was talking about relative to aerospace and defense coming to our colleges and saying that we need X number of workers to come to work for us, and then we say we can do that, but we need to go through our curriculum committees and so forth and so on, and it'll take us 10 months. And they say we need it in 10 days. So, or 10 weeks. Well, I mean, they'll take 10 weeks. But that's a big paradigm shift. We don't have the structure to move that quickly. But education is being asked to move at the speed of business. And I think we can step up to it. And this is one vehicle that allow us to take it one step at a time, and then it'll allow us to escalate it. And with the League for Innovation, we have a Center for Workforce Solutions. And we're looking at 5 major areas of focus right now: construction, manufacturing, cyber IT, healthcare, and aerospace and defense. Karen and the Credential Lab have said, as we bring on these industries, we're asking the industries to voluntarily take that first step and be a part of the pilot testing of the credentialing process for the Credential Lab, to get comfortable with it. Because if they're able to do that along with the process of working with our colleges, then it provides that trust stamp that these are viable, that they're portable, that our students can have faith in them, and that the employers can have faith that they will be accepted and by our colleges across the country, and hopefully be implemented enough so that they can build their workforce.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to close our webinar today by giving Rufus and Karen the opportunity for one final comment about the certification plus degree pathways and opportunities for the future. Karen, I'll start with you.
I think, as I mentioned a little while ago, that change leadership is going to be critical. Thinking of new ways of operating at the institutions is going, and how you think about embedding, developing different types of credentials, and serving a broader array of learners will be critical for our institutions. And I think that hopefully these resources will be very, very helpful for our institutions.
And Rufus?
I think the focus on leadership is critical. Quite frankly, the turnover in institutional leadership at all levels is very frightening at this particular point in time. But to be able to have a movement like this be sustainable, it needs to be a part of the strategic planning. It needs to be a part of the resource allocation. It needs to be a part of the reporting and the structure. And it needs to sustain turnover in leadership. So just looking at those as some of the major sustainability points, I think it's possible and it's inevitable that we need to move in that direction.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much to Kevin, Jen, and Gary for also participating today. I appreciate everyone's time this afternoon participating in the webinar. This webinar will be available on Workcred's website shortly, and we welcome to hear any questions or comments that you have. Have a great rest of the day.
Karen,
Yes.
can I give a shout out to Workcred before we get, I mean,
Yes.
you've been giving us opportunities. You have been an outstanding partner. We look forward to the next steps on this because the game isn't over. So thank you for your leadership and those of Roy and the organization. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And have a good rest of the day and a good rest of the week, everyone. And we'll hopefully see you all soon. Thank you.